Okay, it looks like it's coming up.
Oh, yep.
Okay. Setting up your meeting. Hi, everybody. Not sure if you can see us yet, but we'll just get ourselves set. Okay, I think we are live on YouTube. Welcome, everyone. It's Kelly from Kelly's Astrology here, and I have my fabulous helper Steph here to keep us organized today. We're going to do a Q&A talking about Saturn in Pisces. Everybody. So if you're here and you're joining us live, let us know if you have any questions about Saturn in Pisces. I know it takes a little while for all the broadcasts to come together. So as we're getting started, I'm just going to say a couple of things about Saturn in Pisces to get us in the groove. And then if you're joining us live, you can pop any questions you have in the video chat discussion, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can in the time we have together. So many of you probably know that Saturn has just moved into Pisces early March 2023, and we're going to have Saturn in Pisces for almost 3 years, definitely consistently from March of 23 to May of 2025. And then we get another almost 6 months of Saturn in Pisces from September of 2025 through to February of 2026. So Saturn in Pisces is definitely the vibe of the moment. And I really do appreciate that Saturn and Pisces together is a little bit of like a contradiction of themes. You know, Saturn has this really solid, grounded energy. And of course, Pisces is really emotional, and it has this sort of dispersing, no boundaries quality. So we sort of have the planet of earthiness and anchored boundary containment Saturn in Pisces. So we're definitely going to have collectively more of a flexible kind of fluid energy over these next few years. And one way I always think about Saturn transits is I think about what zodiac signs or what planetary placements are going to be most affected by Saturn as it transits through the different signs. And with Saturn in Pisces, which is a mutable sign, it's all the mutable planetary placements. So if you have planets, not just in Pisces, but also in Gemini, in Virgo, or in Sagittarius, you're going to be working with Saturn over the next couple of years. So what does it mean to be working with Saturn? You're going to be learning about limits. You're going to be learning about containers and boundaries. You're going to be learning about how to organize or simplify things. Saturn is very much about consolidation and paring back. So we're not here for excess. We're really here to focus on core priorities. So I can see a bunch of you joining us. Tiffany is here. Amy is here. Amy and I were together earlier today in a different class environment. Great to see you again. Catalina is here. Jay is here. Great to see you. Eliza. So let us know if you're here, if you have any questions about Saturn in Pisces. And I also want to make sure that I share a discount code that I have. I have 2 webinars on my website all about Saturn transits. One is about Saturn transits through the 12 houses, and I give you some tips and helpful guidelines for working with Saturn through each of the 12 houses. So if Saturn in Pisces is in your 2nd house, or Saturn's going through your 7th house, or if Saturn's transiting your 10th house, there's tips about how to work with that. So that's Saturn transits through the 12 houses. And I have a second webinar about Saturn transits to the planets. So if Saturn in Pisces is going to square your sun or conjunct your moon or oppose your Venus, I've got tips on how to work with that as well. So those webinars are available on my website. But if you are interested in those webinars, I have a code where you can save 10% off those webinars. And that code is Saturn10. So we're going to just type that into the chat. So if you're interested, you can save a little bit off either or both of those classes. So, all right, over to you, Steph. Any questions coming through that we should take some time to explore?
Sure, yeah. Let's see here. So Catalina just mentioned that it's her natal Saturn is in Pisces. So she's having her second Saturn return. I don't know if you want to say anything about that to start.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, anybody who's in their late 20s or late 50s will be having a Saturn return right now. So it would be first Saturn return if you're 28, 29, or 30 and you have Saturn in Pisces in your birth chart. And it'll be second Saturn return if you're sort of 57, 58, 59, and you've got Saturn in Pisces in your birth chart. So second Saturn return is the transition into the wisdom phase. Here, either Saturn return is about adjustment and about consolidation. The first Saturn return is often about consolidating to enter into a period of productivity or growth. The second Saturn return is often about consolidation to realign and simplify. It's not that we're not productive after the age of 58 or 59, but often our priorities and goals are different. We think differently about security. We think differently about longevity. We think differently about the amount of years that we have left. But whenever we're in a Saturn return, we are questioning our priorities and our commitments as if we're like stress testing, is there something that is viable for me to keep up with for the long term? And so some of those questions or prompts can be really helpful to think about as you go through your second Saturn return. A Saturn return really tends to bring us to a turning point or a fairly important transition. And so I think working with this time, understanding that it is about making a change or consolidating or going through that turning point rather than trying to keep things as they are. Saturn really brings a lot of clarity. And when we see a truth or we learn a truth about ourselves, it sort of means we have to restructure our life so that we can live that truth or express that better. So hopefully that's helpful for Catalina and for anyone else who is going through the second Saturn return. So that's a few thoughts there. And Steph, let us know what other questions we can answer together today.
Absolutely. Tiffany asked if you have any tips for a Scorpio rising she has Venus, Mars, and the IC in Pisces in the 5th house. And additionally, the ruler of Pisces, Jupiter, is in Sag.
Okay. So, first and foremost, I think, Tiffany, Scorpio rising charts using the whole sign system, you have Saturn in Pisces in your 5th house. So the next 2 to 3 years is really going to ask you to get organized about creativity and to make having fun a priority. We often talk about the 5th house as having to do with kids, which it certainly does, and I'll speak about that in a minute. But the heart of the 5th house is pleasure and leisure activities. And when Saturn's there, I know it seems like, does that mean I'm going to have no fun for 3 years? It might mean your time for fun is limited, but that makes it all the more important to do only the most enjoyable things when you do have leisure time. So Saturn transiting the 5th can be a lot about how do I get organized to have fun? But sometimes we have to go through a process of rediscovering what it is we actually enjoy doing. Now, you mentioned you've got Venus, Mars, and the IC in Pisces as well. So if you're a Scorpio rising and you have Mars in Pisces, that means Mars is the planet that most directly describes you. And so Saturn going through the ascendant ruling sign or going over your ascendant ruling planet, that really prompts us to restructure our identity. And you might be working with changes in your life that are based on roles or responsibilities or even identities that you've outgrown. You realize that you have matured, that you've got more life experience or insight, and you don't want to do the things you used to do. You may not want to be associated with the kinds of people that you used to be associated with. So there's a lot of personal growth, self-development when Saturn is aspecting by transit the ruling planet of the ascendant. in the chart. So that's huge. And then you've got Venus, which is naturally about relationships. But if with a Scorpio rising chart, Venus also personally rules your Taurus 7th house. So Saturn to Venus, the ruler of your 7th, there is some restructuring and maybe some reorganizing about commitments within relationships for you. So it's quite a big time for you with the ruler of the 1st and the ruler of the 7th being activated by transiting Saturn. The balance between self and other is kind of up, ready to be reworked. You don't want to have the old patterns or habits or tendencies that you've had in the past. So that's a little bit about that. And of course, the 5th house is also about children and fertility and conception. And so depending on your age and stage of life, for some individuals, this can be about getting more serious about family planning and building their family. For other people, it's about the effort that goes into parenting. And sometimes if we're a little older, a transit like of Saturn through the 5th house can also be about responsibilities as a grandparent to grandkids. So there's some of the ways topics to do with children can come in for this as well. Great questions so far, Steph.
That was super, super helpful. Cam asks, does that mean, so when Pisces is in Saturn, does that mean that wherever Pisces, or sorry, Saturn's in Pisces, does that mean that wherever Pisces is in your chart, you're going to have to be flexible boundaries?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think there's different ways to think about Saturn in Pisces and boundaries, depending on whether we're looking at Saturn in Pisces as a collective influence, like something for the general society in which we might live, or something about our personal chart. So when I think about the essence of Saturn in Pisces from like that collective or global perspective, it is a more malleable version of Saturn. Now, Saturn doesn't really get soft and cuddly. That's not the nature of Saturn. But we might think about Saturn in Pisces as being less rigid or firm about rules and regulations as, say, Saturn in Aquarius or Saturn in Capricorn might have been. So at a collective level, I think there's a little bit more give and take or a little bit more movement that you might see expressed, in companies or organizations or with politics, for instance. But when I think about it from a personal chart level, Saturn coming into the part of your chart where you do Pisces, with timing, we're always thinking about what's different here. Normally, the part of your chart where you have the zodiac sign of Pisces is an area of life where you might have more of a free form, wide ranging, very diverse approach. You might not do a lot of focus or structure in this area of life. And so Saturn showing up as a temporary transit to the part of your chart where you have the zodiac sign of Pisces, it may actually be personally an area of your life where you do need to get maybe not totally rigid, immovable boundaries, but you need to bring a sense of focus, a sense of clarity, and a little bit of that paring back so that we're not doing all the things that Pisces as a sign ruled by Jupiter tends to want to do. We're going to have to choose, anytime you say to a mutable sign, you can't really say just choose one thing, but you could say choose 2 or 3 or 4 things. Like less than 5 is usually what when Saturn is affecting mutable planets, we have to go from 7 or 8 or 11 things down to 3 or 4 or maybe 5. And that's still a streamline. So that would be how I'd think about that a little differently, whether I'm thinking about Saturn as a collective global influence versus how I'm thinking about Saturn affecting us as individuals. Yeah.
Lovely. Amy has a question here. If Saturn's going through your 6th house, should you be concerned about health or maybe just make all the doctor appointments?
Great question, Amy. I love it. Yeah. I think your suggestion about making all the doctor's appointments is totally accurate. And so what I want to say here too is just introduce another little concept, which is about the idea of sect, the Hellenistic doctrine of sect to do with ancient astrology, where Saturn is a little bit more productive or constructive in a day chart, and it can be a little bit more challenging or problematic in a night chart. And the reason I mention that now is that depending on whether you're a day chart or a night chart, you might have a little bit more of a productive version or a little bit more of a challenging version of your Saturn transit. So in your case, Amy, Saturn transiting the 6th house, If it's sort of a day chart, it might be I'm being really proactive. I'm really working in the prevention and maintenance zone to do with my health. Anytime I see a Saturn transit affecting health, I'm always talking to people about age-related health factors that they know they should be having tests or checkups around. I think Saturn has a lot to do with prevention and maintenance. And so if there are things you know you should be doing for your health, whether that's having regular checkups of some kind based on your age or your family history, or whether it's maintaining a certain level of physical activity because you have an underlying health issue, whatever it might be, Saturn kind of comes along and says, oh, you've been doing well on this. Here's your report card. Or, hey, you haven't been pulling your weight with this wellness thing. And so here's a couple of consequences that that might spur you to be a little bit more serious about it. If you're a night chart and you're having Saturn through the 6th house, that might be a little bit more in the territory of there may be something of some substance going on with your health that you want to make sure you're addressing. Typically with Saturn and health, we are dealing with either age-related things or health conditions that might have like a long-running or even a chronic quality. Now, it's not to say everybody who is having transiting Saturn in their 6th house is going to have a chronic health condition, but there might be a health matter that comes up that doesn't have a quick fix, that is going to require some consistent effort or some steady effort over time to help manage or kind of contain. So that's what I would be thinking in terms of Saturn in the 6th. The other type of transit that I would talk to a client about in terms of health with a Saturn transit would be Saturn transiting the 6th house. If Saturn in Pisces will make a conjunction, square, or opposition to the moon in your chart, which is the main planet to do with the body, or if Saturn in Pisces will make a conjunction, square, or opposition to the planet that rules your ascendant. And of course, if Saturn is transiting the 1st house, which is of the body in the chart, that would be another, let's talk about health, or let's have a check-in about health kind of indicator for me. So great question. Love talking about this.
Amazing. Thank you. Debbie asked, she said that she has transiting Saturn on her ascendant, and it will be squaring her Venus, Sun, and Mars in Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
And it will also be opposing her moon in Virgo. She's 54. Can you offer some advice or guidance?
Okay, so we've got Saturn transiting your ascendant. So Pisces rising, Venus, Sun, and Mars in Gemini in the whole sign 4th, and then the moon in Virgo. Okay, so I mean, anyone who's a Pisces rising, that definitely ticks the box for some health stuff, as we were just talking about. So there'd be something here about having to get a bit more organized with taking care of your physical body. Saturn going through the ascendant or the 1st house sign, this is also a little bit of a catch up with yourself transit, where you're trying to really get to know the person that you are today. So there's a lot of personal growth or self-development that happens with Saturn in the 1st house. And with Saturn in the 1st house, we're getting to know who we are by taking things out of our life that no longer align or resonate with us. So, when we say Jupiter is about saying yes and Saturn is about saying no, what Saturn is doing is helping you pare back to what I like to think. I love the garden, so I'm always talking in garden analogies, but I always think about the rose bushes. When we prune them in the winter time, we kind of prune them back to the rootstock, the really solid trunk of the rose bush. And we cut it back to that so that the rose plant can conserve its energy and strengthen its roots so that come the following spring, it is ready to shine again. And I think just as a general theme, if you're having a big Saturn transit, it is about a paring back or a pruning. And so in this situation where Saturn's going through the 1st house, there is that paring back so that you're doing the things that are most meaningful for you, or that you're focused on your top priorities. And you may not have time or energy for lots of extra things right now. That's totally okay. I see, Debbie, that you've got the Sun, Venus, and Mars in Gemini, and then the moon in Virgo. So like many mutable heavy charts, you've got lots of parts of your chart and life being lit up. And I typically like to break down the topics with each planet. So Saturn to the sun can also be about identity. But if you're a Pisces rising, the sun will be the ruler of your Leo 6th house. So we have a second indicator that health or wellness or daily routine is highlighted and up for restructuring and review, that you're ready to make some changes there. Of course, the 6th house can also be about pets, as well as your daily work or kind of necessary activities. Venus and money, and Mars have to do with money in a Pisces rising chart. We have an Aries 2nd house and a Libra 8th house. So there might be some financial consolidation or restructuring that you're undergoing as well. In a Pisces rising chart, Venus and Mars also rule the 3rd and 9th houses. So you might be exploring and updating your communication and self-expression skills. And there may be a deepening desire to have a kind of richer commitment with a wisdom tradition or a philosophical pathway. And then the moon, again, about body and health. And in a Pisces rising chart, the moon does rule the 5th house of children and creativity. So there may be something about figuring out what fun looks and feels like for you. I also have a Pisces rising, and I've got the moon in a mutable sign. And so one of the things I just realized the other day is I'm having a little bit of this particular transit as you are. And one of the things I realized the other day was I'm not actually sure what I do for fun anymore, because I realized pottering about my house and decluttering cupboards and stuff, that's not actually fun. That's like stuff that needs to be done to run the household. So I've just had this sort of awareness with this Saturn to the ruler of the 5th that I'm like, I need to kind of remember or like rediscover or discover some things that are just leisure. You know, the 5th house can be a tricky one to connect with in the modern world, because my understanding of the essence of this is activities that we undertake for no outcome or achievement at all, but for the sheer enjoyment of being in the moment doing the thing. And so that can change that. Like, I enjoy cooking, but a big reason that I enjoy baking is I like to eat what I've finished baking. You know, if I make a sweet or a treat, I love that. So it's sort of really prompting me to think more deeply about that. So that's a little bit, but also for the moon is about emotions. And when Saturn transits the moon, we're really trying to figure out where and how we feel supported in our lives, where and how we started to feel perhaps a bit lonely or a bit isolated, where we feel we're carrying extra burdens and other people aren't helping us out. And so a Saturn moon transit's a really tender, kind of vulnerable process about really learning how to nurture ourselves. And sometimes that involves declining the invitations others bring to us to help them out with their stuff so that we can make sure we're taking care of ourselves. So I've kind of broken some of these pieces down, Debbie, into some of the different topics, but we could say just generally, you know, and I do see this with clients all the time. You know, I had a number of clients that were heavy fixed sign charts. So, you know, people who might have had planets in Leo and Scorpio and Taurus. And as Saturn went through Aquarius over the past 3 years, they went through major updates and restructures in so many parts of their lives. And Debbie, you're like other people who have lots of mutable placements, you're going to be going through that over the next 3 years as well. So I would invite you to offload or step away from things that have become really demanding, really draining, and that no longer really feel like they're in alignment with that core essence of yourself that you're uncovering. It's a big process, and that's kind of why we have a few years to do it when Saturn shows up. There we go. Steph, are you having many Saturn transits yourself? Do you have any mutable placements?
I don't, but I have a fixed T-square. So I just
right. So you just come out of the Saturn in Aquarius zone. Okay.
That is very true. So I get a little break from Saturn for a bit, but now
which is totally, yes. And that's how it happens. I think sometimes we do have these intensive periods where it's like, all serious, all Saturn. You know, Saturn also has this longer time frame. So I find when we're in a lot of Saturn transits, we can't just do the short-term easy fix. We have to really think, how is this going to help future me? Like, how will I be 7 years from now? Is this to my benefit, or is this just going to be another burden that I have 7 more years of resentment of dealing with, kind of thing?
Totally.
Yeah.
Do you want to do a couple more?
Yeah, let's do another question.
Here's a great one from David. He asks, do you have any thoughts on what Saturn is bringing to Neptune and Pisces, longer trends that we've been having?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Because I do think it's really interesting that Saturn is kind of coming through Pisces at the tail end of the Neptune in Pisces transit. And in fact, there will be a period of time, of course, like now, where Saturn is at the start of Pisces and Neptune is at the end of Pisces. But in terms of the two actually coming together, it doesn't happen until 0 degrees Aries. It's like as Saturn and Neptune both cross into Aries, that's when they become conjunct. So Saturn is like chasing Neptune through the zodiac. In some ways, I feel like it's a little bit of the cleanup crew. And one thing that's a little bit relevant perhaps to the astrological or metaphysical field, since Neptune has come into Pisces, there really has been this explosion of magical, mystical stuff that has become much more mainstream. It's a lot more cool these days to be a witch or to have pagan interests or to have a little magical altar in your home and do all these woo-woo things, which I think is fantastic. But I also think maybe there's been such a quick proliferation over the last few years with Neptune in Pisces that I'm not sure that everybody who's practicing has got perhaps, loads of experience. So there's a lot of newer people that have come into the field. And I've been a new practitioner in my field. I know you have to start somewhere. But I do think about Saturn coming through Pisces as a little bit of a quality control and certainly a little bit of a contraction or consolidation. Now, of course, I personally don't necessarily want an interest in metaphysical things to vanish or go away. That's kind of how I create my livelihood. But I could certainly see about maybe stabilizing or simplifying or even just really highlighting the practitioners in all the metaphysical fields that have substance or experience and them being able to develop. And there may be some people who in the last kind of 1 to 5 years have come into, whether it's astrology or tarot or other metaphysical fields, that might decide they don't want to make a business out of it. They like to keep it as a hobby. So I think a little bit of maybe there's some attrition or some consolidation. And that's just one reflection in the spiritual field. I think other topics that are very Piscean, of course, literal water. So, water access, water logistics and delivery, like the quality of the oceans, melting ice, that type of thing, and gas. These are all kind of Pisces, Neptunian things. And I wonder about Saturn in Pisces bringing more of a stark or serious kind of realization about the quality of water or how much water there is or what's happening with, distribution of gas, for instance. It's like oil and gas is a little tied to this Neptune Pisces piece. So I think Saturn is here, is trying to maybe make a more fair playing field and certainly highlighting where there is suffering going on, say for a lack of access to clean water or some of the impact that, oil and gas is having, and then sort of figuring out how we're going to need to make social or structural collective changes around those topics. So there's just a few pieces there, David. Great question.
Do you want to do one more?
Yeah, let's do one more and then we can wrap up. And just before you ask the last question, Steph, I'll make sure everybody knows that we do have a discount code, Saturn 10. So the word Saturn with the number 10. If you are interested in either of those Saturn transit webinars, you can find more information on the website, but we'll also share the links in the chat here, just in case you came in after we started.
Yeah, I just popped those in, so I hope that you guys can see them with the discount as well, discount code. So this isn't really a question, but a few people have just mentioned Saturn transiting their moon, and I know you talked about that already a little bit, but there's like a handful of people in here that have that. So I was wondering if you want to say just like any last words for them with that.
That's a really great question. I mean, it is such a big transit. I actually recorded a whole separate YouTube video. It's about 20 minutes just on Saturn transits to the moon. And I think I also have a blog post called Saturn Transits to the Moon, something about resilience. So what I will say on that is whenever I see a client having a big Saturn moon transit, I just like my heart just swells with sort of compassionate tenderness, because I know it's a transit that can feel a little tough. It can feel like some of the things you're dealing with are just taking a lot of your effort or a lot of your energy. And, the moon represents some of our most tender formative experiences. Saturn moon transits will often take us back to some of our main childhood events and experiences. They may be tied to mother, which is often a person connected to the moon, but it's often more connected to feelings of safety and security in childhood, or a lack of safety and security in childhood. And one of the wisdom pieces you can get out of a Saturn moon transit, there's like a reparenting where you're sort of able to be more clear and honest with yourself about maybe what you didn't get when you were a kid, and how you can be really gentle and protective of yourself around those things as an adult. Saturn moon transits really teach us how to mother ourselves, how to nurture ourselves, or how to really care for ourselves. And I don't know that we all have a great grasp of what that looks and feels like. And sometimes the best advice that I share with clients about a Saturn moon transit is if you had a young child that was in your care, maybe, if I'm thinking about my nephew who's 3 or my niece who's 6, and they're not having a great day, I think, how would I approach them? Would I give them a hug, or would I leave them alone? Would I offer them a snack or a blanket, or, would we watch their favorite show, or would I just leave them to sort things out on their own? And I don't know about you, but whenever I see a young child that seems like they're not super happy, I want to see what might be helpful. Now, young kids don't always know what they need, but if you offer some of those really basics, like, do you need a snack? Do you need some water? Are you warm enough? Do you need a rest? Do we need to slow down? Do we need to go to a place that feels comfortable to you? Do we need to go home if we're out? Or if we're at home, do we need to just go and curl up in bed for a little while? And I know it seems like maybe a little primitive or basic, but we are in some of our most tender, vulnerable, almost childlike states when we're dealing with a Saturn moon. You can still be functional, you can still make decisions, your executive function is still on, you could still be a functioning adult, but you might need to have some of those moments of just really tender self-care as you're going through that. So I definitely recommend that. And then somebody made a comment here about, this is just a follow-up about the Saturn in Pisces, Steph, about, do I imagine more advances in dream work and sleep science with Saturn in Pisces? Yes, I think we're going to be learning a lot more about sleep. I mean, I was talking to a medical health level person who's a friend of mine recently, and she was saying, like, even in like medical fields, there isn't a lot of understanding about what actually happens when we're asleep. We know it's important. We know there are some physical processes that happen when we're asleep, and there's a lot of stuff that the body's doing when we're asleep that we really don't know about. And I think that's a great mystery. The other area that popped into my mind is the psychedelic field. So the area of treating, trauma or emotional pain or psychological issues by using mind-altering substances. I mean, that is just about the most Piscean thing, I think. Not that this is new work, if you're aware of some of the research happening, like with Stan Grof and his contemporaries in the 60s, this has been going on for a long time. And of course, traditional cultures have used mind-altering substances for all kinds of purposes for thousands of years. But I think we're going to see a little bit more of that structuring of Saturn coming into what was perhaps really considered a bit weird or cutting edge for a long time. So that's something else for Saturn in Pisces, I think, to keep a watch on. Yeah. So, gosh, Steph, this was so juicy today.
Yeah, lots of great questions and super helpful answers. So I hope it was nice and rich for everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, Steph. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's been so great to see so many of you in the chat. And Amy, thank you so much for your kind words. Amy is saying she just had Saturn over her moon, and Kelly's insight was spot on. She highly recommends the class that we've got the discount on. So that will be transition and turning points, Saturn transits to the planets. You can save 10% off that with the code. And if not, do go and check out that Saturn moon video that's also here on YouTube if that's of special importance to you. I wasn't sure how many people would be interested in that, but based on the numbers on the YouTube video, that's clearly a big one. And it's definitely a transit I've known to kind of watch in my practice for sure. So we wish you all the best. We'll be here again soon doing another Q&A. Until then, thanks so much, Steph, for being here. And thanks to everyone else. And we'll see you next time.